What's up, guys? It's Wes. Welcome to another video. So lately I've been getting a lot of direct messages and Discord messages and stuff like that about some of the best ways to kind of come to terms or get your grips on how to use Rebelle as opposed to a different painting software. It is a little bit different, and it's something that I hold near and dear to my heart. I love Rebelle. I've been a beta tester for Rebelle since Rebelle 4, I think. So many years with Rebelle, and I love it dearly. And I thought it'd be a great time to make a video with 5 kind of easy tricks and kind of things you can do to kind of come to terms with the program itself. These are going to be things that you may already know if you use Rebelle a lot. Sorry, this might not be the video for you, but there might be a few things that you maybe didn't think of, or maybe, there's so many tools in that program that maybe you kind of forgot Rebelle had. So my thing is, I wanted to make a list of 5 things that you can do quickly and easily to kind of come to terms with the program, get more comfortable within it. And I think the more comfortable you get within really any program, but especially Rebelle, the more fun you're going to have. You're going to make better artwork. It's just going to be a better time. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into these. And in fact, I have 5, but I might even give you a bonus. So let's get to it. Alrighty, so here we are in Rebelle. I'm using Rebelle 7 Pro, and I'm thrilled with the software. I love it dearly, but it is kind of a tough nut to crack if you're brand new to the Rebelle ecosystem. And also if let's just say you're getting kind of just first into digital art. There's a lot that's going to be different than something like Clip Studio Paint or Photoshop or, Krita even. Rebelle is its own ecosystem through and through. So before we get too far into this, I want to kind of explain what I'm working on. So we're going to do this a little bit different. Instead of just a pure time lapse where you just see the time lapse from beginning to end, I've used all of the tips that I am going to be talking about in this specific piece. So as I'm mentioning that piece, I'm going to show you that step of the process. Hopefully it'll make sense once we get going. But yeah, I've been wanting to do some more kind of from imagination character art type stuff. So that's what we're going to be working on here. And also I've really been loving the visual style of, kind of like the Star Ocean, second story remaster, second story R that they came out with, and also the newer Persona games. I'm really liking that look. However, that's not a very traditional medium look. It's very kind of not airbrushed, but very, hard round, soft round, that type of stuff. But where Rebelle really shines is in its traditional media. So I'm going to be trying my hand at a version of that look that I'm really liking, the poppy colors, saturation, stuff like that, with kind of the more stylized, not necessarily anime, but more stylized character. And yeah, we're just going to make something that looks cool. That's kind of the goal, right? But we're going to be using all the thick oils. We're going to be using everything that makes Rebelle awesome. So watercolors and, your charcoals and all that stuff. So that's kind of the goal. But let's get into these. I want to get into these pretty quick. That way you can kind of jot them down and, make a piece of your own that kind of utilizes these. Because I think after this and after you kind of get these in the bag, you're going to be off to the races. So number 1, I think it does come with changing your mindset. I do think that you have to embrace the chaos of traditional media. That's what Rebelle is made for. It's made to mimic watercolor, acrylics, oils, these more traditional media that are a little unpredictable. I mean, unless you have decades and decades of experience using this stuff, meaning watercolors and stuff like that you never quite know what you're going to get. You can get a pretty close estimate. You can mentally think about it. Oh, I'll put this color here. I'll put this color here. But you never know how the brush is going to behave. You never know how the paint is going to behave. And that's part of the learning curve of Rebelle. And I see that being the biggest learning curve. So a lot of people are like, hey, I like to get pixel perfect stuff. Rebelle is not that. So even if you use Rebelle in this sense as kind of an underpainting, and then export your image into another program and do that pixel perfect work, I think you're going to have a good time. So the more you embrace this just absolute like chaos, controlled chaos, I should say, of traditional, I think you're going to enjoy it. So that brings us to the next 2 points. So the first one, well, actually, this is point number 2, is going to be utilizing the visual settings tab. So the visual settings tab kind of gives you all the nuts and bolts of controlling the chaotic behavior. So this is going to be the area where you put, whenever I use an impasto brush, maybe a thick oil paint brush, how much impasto effect do I get? Or with watercolor, how extreme is the paint dripping? How like reabsorbent is the paper? If I add more water to the paper, does it affect paint that's already on it? Or is it only affecting paint that I put on after the fact? You can control things like that and kind of in different dials and dimensions in this visual settings tab. So this is kind of a hidden deal. It's over by you can either get to it from the main menu or you can get to it. I usually do it from the layers panel. There's like this little kind of hamburger menu looking thing. And I'll do a close up of it. That way you guys can see it and I'll circle it and all that good stuff. But if you open up that visual settings tab, you're going to see visual settings for every single type of brush that's in Rebelle, whether it's oil or acrylic or pastel. It's going to talk even about the canvas. How exposed is the canvas? Like, how much tooth does it have? How much like dry brushing, scumbling, all that stuff is going to be here. So do not go without looking at the visual settings tab, because you may not like the initial settings as they are out of the box, but even after a few tweaks, you may be thrilled with how your paintings start looking, just because you have that more ownership, that more control over those settings. And yeah, I highly recommend it. Even if you want to give yourself like half an hour, just barely tweak a setting, go in, paint a stroke, see what happens. Go back to the settings, keep that visual settings window open, and then just keep kind of going back and forth until you get something that you might be happy with. But also know that each painting is its own monster. So you can either find the settings that you really love and like just keep them there. You know what I mean? For every painting you ever do, that's your style and Rebelle, go for it. But usually what I do is I usually have an idea of the type of look that I want before I start my painting. So the first thing I do is I go into my visual settings and try my best to make the settings match the vibe I want to go for. So if I want really drippy watercolors, or if I want really raw, dry canvas where I can see like each like thread of linen or cotton or whatever canvas I'm using, if I want to see that stuff, I just go in and make sure in those visual settings to make that happen. And then number 3 kind of connects to this. All of these sort of connect together. Rebelle is a very kind of all-encompassing program. So as you get better with one part, you're actually getting better with all of the other parts too. So part number 3, step number 3, tip number 3, whatever you want to call it. Experiment with mixed media. So use different categories on the same painting. A lot of people will just lock in, hey, I like the oil brushes. I'm just going to use the oil brushes, which is great. I mean, they're fantastic oil brushes. So that's a great way to go. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by what you can do by mixing these different mediums. And what I really like to do, I'll do underpainting and kind of washing my canvas with watercolor, like heavy drippy watercolor. And then I'll paint on top with either acrylics or oils or, the palette knife type of stuff. And then to diffuse some of these harsher brushstrokes, I actually go back with either kind of a charcoal pastel, like a softer pastel, or even watercolors again, and sort of diffuse these more harsh areas that I want to kind of blend out or make a soft edge. I'll actually go back in with those softer brushes, whatever kind of media that looks like, and do that. And I've had great luck with it. I really love it. I did a lot of Ashley Wood studies He's an Australian artist. He's known for comic books and a lot of like World War Robot and all that stuff. But I'm a big fan of his stuff from the Metal Gear Solid graphic novels. And I wanted to emulate his style. And I actually found Rebelle was the best program to emulate Ashley Wood's traditional oil and acrylic painting style. A lot of fun. So whenever you get in there, don't be afraid to do the mixed media. Go to every category, see what it offers you. Try some inks, try some, charcoal and pastel with the watercolor on top of the oils, on top of the acrylics, on top of that is the nice thing about Rebelle, is since it is digital, you can break a lot of rules that traditional painting would say is a no-no. So like in oil painting, you do fat over lean. And what that means is each layer has to have more oil than the layer below it. And the reason why, the way oils work is they oxidize. They don't dry, but they oxidize, which is a much longer process. Sometimes an oxidation period for a painting could be over a year. But what you're going to do, what I normally do on traditional stuff, I start my underpainting with acrylics, because acrylics dry within a few hours. They are like bone dry within a few hours. So as long as something is dried, then you can paint on top of it with, maybe oil paint with liquid. And then, have that kind of do its thing, because liquid speeds up that oxidation process. And then you do just straight up, oil paint. Then let's say you do another thing of oil paint with linseed oil added to it. You see what I mean? So you have to do fat over lean. The more fat, the more oil you have, that's going to be your topmost layers. But hell, with Rebelle, you can kind of do whatever you want. You can start with oils and then put watercolors on top of them, and then paint over that with some palette knife acrylic stuff, and then go back over with oils. And you don't have to worry about the actual physics of how this stuff works. You can embrace the chaos. You can do some stuff that you could never do traditionally. And that gives you a whole lot of power, a whole lot of options, and makes some pretty cool effects based on how that math works out, whenever all those paints start blending together. So yeah, give it a shout, man. Experiment with those mixed medias, and I think you're going to have a real good time. Number 4, use the reference panel. I see a lot of people shying away from the reference panel. I mean, we can make a whole other video about how I think artists don't use enough reference, me included. Like this one, I'm just using reference for for kind of the colors and the painting and stuff, because I need to see what that style is for those Star Ocean or Persona style. How do they do shadows? How do they do cast shadows versus core shadows? And what happens to the saturation whenever, that's what I'm looking at. And what's great is you can color pick from this reference panel, but something you can also do, let's say you're doing a portrait study, you can actually, without, tracing, which you can still do, it gives you the option to put your reference image on your canvas, like transparently, and that way you can kind of see what you're up to. But you can also use these amazing like ruler guides, which is where you kind of make a mark on the reference image, and that mark shows up not exponentially, well, maybe so, basically in the same proportion that it would be as you're transferring it over to the canvas. So proportional divider, proportional ruler is what it is. So it looks like little chopsticks if you use a traditional one, where you measure something on your reference and then you have a size picked out to where it makes that same exact line at a different proportion on your canvas. It's a really cool tool. It takes a little bit to get used to, but in Rebelle, they made it really easy. Basically, you just use your ruler, your proportional ruler, and it's going to make those marks for you on your canvas. So that way you can put the eye socket where it goes. You can put the nose where it goes without directly tracing. So if you feel kind of iffy about tracing over a reference image, if you're doing a study or something, which I understand, use that ruler. That ruler is great because it's going to test your eye to be like, hey, was I right? Was I wrong? Did I make the nose too long? Do I make the mouth too short? It gives you that type of feedback, which is great. But yeah, that reference panel on Rebelle has some very, very powerful stuff that you should definitely give a second look at. And then the last step, number 5, I will say with Rebelle, to get better faster, and this does work with other softwares as well, but especially something as different as Rebelle, small steps lead to big gains. So my recommendation is do 20 small pieces. Do 20 studies of like, here's an orange, here's an apple, here's a banana. You don't. It doesn't have to be some big sweeping landscape. It doesn't have to be some huge book cover-esque thing, Magic the Gathering card. It doesn't have to be any of that. Just do very specific exercises within Rebelle to get a better sense and feel for how you're going to solve problems for your bigger pieces. Do you know what I mean? So like compartmentalize. Okay, how am I going to do shadows? How am I going to do my highlights? How am I going to do, my composition or, rulers or any of that stuff? Anything that you're wanting to bring into a bigger piece, practice it first with a smaller piece. I promise you, if I put somebody in the room and say, hey, you have 2 weeks, and this person, you're only allowed to work on one painting over 2 weeks. And then this person, you have to do 30 paintings in 2 weeks. And put them in a room. And then whenever they come out after that 2 weeks, I will put every dollar I have that the artist that did the 20 or 30 paintings is more confident, is better with the tools, is they will just have their wits about them, rather than the person that worked on one painting. And you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't make sense, because with one painting, you can really render and make it look good. You're only solving the same problem over and over and over. You're not expanding. You're not getting better. You're not pushing yourself the same way you would with 30 small pieces in that same amount of time. I promise you. Promise. My first 2 years of working professionally, I did one painting a day. They weren't great paintings by any means, but I mean, you talk about if I did an hour a day over 2 years, that's over 700 hours, pushing towards that 10,000 hours of mastery. So think about it. Think about doing those smaller steps, and it's going to pay off with bigger gains, I promise you. So hopefully you like those tips, but I will say here is a very specific one. If you have Rebelle 7 Pro, this is a feature that's in Rebelle 7 Pro. It has a few more options for you. So you have a pigment blending mode, which is kind of like your realistic optical blending as far as the way paint mixes together to make colors. The yellow and the blue make green. Sometimes that works in other painting programs. Sometimes it does not. It just makes a weird gray mud thing. So that's a good one, and that's cool. But really, in my opinion, the more important feature that Rebelle 7 Pro has is what's called the NanoPixel export. And the reason why I say this, every time I make an art print, I go through NanoPixel. NanoPixel is an upscaler, so it is AI, but not the dirty generative AI that you're used to hearing about and me yelling about. This is an upscaler, which is algorithmically based. Basically, what this does is it takes your image and it expands it, makes it larger without losing image quality. So it keeps your edges sharp. It keeps all the rendering exactly where you put it. It keeps the canvas textures there. It does all of that. It mathematically expands your image. And the reason why this is so powerful, in my opinion, is let's say you have a computer that, it can run Rebelle okay, but you have to do kind of small canvas sizes. Like, let's say your biggest canvas size can only be like 1080, 1920 by 1080 at 72 DPI, which is, HD, but, nowadays with 4K and 8K and all that stuff, it can feel limiting. However, once you get done with your painting, that 1920 by 1080, you can take it into Rebelle. And this is even if you worked on a piece outside of Rebelle. If you did a Clip Studio or Photoshop or Krita or whatever, you can import your image into Rebelle, go in, do the NanoPixel export, and you can get up to 4 times the resolution. So I'm talking 8K, 16K, definitely big enough to make prints. If you want to open a print shop, this is the best way to do it, in my opinion, because you use that NanoPixel, you expand work you already did, you make it larger, you make it print quality as far as the size and the ratios and the DPI, PPI, all that stuff. You do that with no real slogging on your computer. It has to take a minute to render the image, but after that, you're done. You just upload that to Imprint or whatever, Redbubble or whatever kind of print shop you have, and you're good to go, man. It can export to like PNG to JPEG. A lot of the print places I do go either like PDF files or JPEG, and NanoPixel will do both of them. So it's fantastic. It is a hidden gem feature that not a lot of people talk about with Rebelle 7 Pro. And I hope they keep NanoPixel forever, because this is like the game changer for me. Every major painting that I like the look of, I can now make it a print without even worrying about making it as a print. Do you know what I mean? Like while I'm painting it, I don't have to paint it at 10K and then lower it and sharpen and all this other stuff. I don't have to do any of that post-production anymore. I can literally just make my painting, expand it with NanoPixel, and put it up for sale. So super, super powerful stuff. Rebelle is great, guys. It is super good. It has so many tools for artists. You can really make it your own. So I'm hoping that some of these tips have come in handy and maybe showed you a different light of Rebelle. Get you back in there, get you training, get you where you need to be as far as your skill sets in Rebelle. But that is my time for this time. Hope you enjoyed the painting. Hope you enjoyed some of the tips. And I will catch you all next time. And by the way, next time I will have a little announcement. Actually, I'll do it right now. Hey guys, I'm officially a Magic the Gathering artist. We'll talk more about it next time. All right, we'll see you soon. Peace.